This is The Journey Podcast Edition. If what you're building didn't come with a playbook, you're in the right place.
Welcome back to The Journey Podcast Edition. I am your host, Paul, and every month I tackle a community Ask Me Anything question. It's a bit like an entrepreneurial version of Dear Abby, for builders. And today we've got a fantastic question from Daniel in Vancouver. Daniel's building a sustainable outdoor gear brand that uses plastics recovered from the ocean. His challenge is one that's not too uncommon when it comes to founders who are building brands based on purpose. I don't want to rely on discounting or greenwashing to build my startup's brand, Daniel writes. How can I tell our story in a way that's authentic and builds a loyal customer base? First of all, thanks, Dan. This is it's a great question. I appreciate you asking it. This is one of those topics and questions that has some nuance to it. It can get a little bit complicated, and it's also quite important to think about. The truth is, the tension you're feeling, it's not unique to sustainability-driven businesses. Any brand that tries to stand on purpose as one of its core kind of planks of organizational DNA, whether it's environmental responsibility, social equity, community impact, they're eventually going to run into the same kind of core challenge. Purpose attracts attention. But when the story and the reality don't line up, consumer trust collapses, and that's the risk. Greenwashing created a trust problem. Let's start there, and everybody kind of knows this. It's a problem, right? Greenwashing in plain terms is when a company makes exaggerated, misleading, or flat out just false claims about its environmental practices and benefits. Sometimes it's intentional. Sometimes it's just sloppy storytelling, cutting corners. Either way, the effect is kind of the same. It breaks consumer trust. Here's the kicker. Trust is incredibly fragile. Once a customer believes that you've misled them, it can be nearly impossible to win them back. I'll give you a personal example. I'm a pretty average Canadian consumer. I don't make every purchase decision based on sustainability. It's more kind of a case of where options exist. There's a more environmentally responsible product, and the price premium isn't completely misaligned with what I'm willing to pay. I'll always choose the responsible option. But when I discover a brand has misled me, claim to be green or ethical, when the truth is murkier, I'm done. That's it. I don't go back. I hold grudges. Just ask a telecoms provider that is very blue in their branding who hasn't gotten $1 from me in 30 years. I don't think I'm alone. Maybe I am alone in the 30 years thing. But people forgive honest mistakes. They don't forgive betrayal. That's why greenwashing doesn't just hurt the guilty companies. It poisons the well for other companies that are trying to build a business around that core set of values, that core purpose. Even companies that are doing real hard, good work, they get caught up in the skepticism, perhaps a little bit unfairly. Now, why it's harder for purpose-driven brands, and Daniel, this is where your challenge really kind of comes in. The paradox of building a purpose-driven brand is that your strength, your values, can also become your biggest vulnerability. Customers will hold you to a higher standard. And if you fall short, they're going to call out your brand, your company, faster and louder than they would a brand that never really made claims in the first place, right? That's kind of human nature. And on top of that, the regulatory landscape around sustainability in most countries is kind of inconsistent. More so in North America than in Europe, but still kind of inconsistent everywhere in a lot of ways. In some industries, there's very little oversight about advertising claims. That means that consumers don't have a clear, trusted baseline for what's legitimate. And without that baseline, skepticism kind of festers, right? Like in a vacuum of information, the worst kind of assumptions propagate. So how do you break through? We can kind of think about this problem in borrowing from the technology adoption curve. This was kind of popularized by Crossing the Chasm. So imagine a bell curve of customers. On the far left, you've got for technology anyway, you've got your innovators, your early adopters. When we're thinking about this through a values-based lens, these two parts of the bell curve are cause devotees. It's the smallest kind of group, the people who care deeply about the purpose, the mission that you kind of have as a company when you build your brand on that. They're very passionate. They're values-first buyers. And if you win them over, they're very strong supporters and loyal advocates for, forever, unless you break promises to them that they don't like. Next, you've got people who are aligned to the cause, but not quite as intense about it. I call these the cause aligned, and they make up a bigger group than the cause devotees, but it's still not like the biggest part of the customer adoption bell curve by a long shot. Then you've kind of got a bigger chunk of people who are sympathetic to those values. They kind of share some of those values. They're aligned to them, but it's not their biggest kind of factor when making a purchase. And I would probably sit in this group, to be honest. After that, on the other side of kind of the mainstream, where you've got the big chunks of the bell curve, you've got people who are kind of indifferent. They don't really care one way or the other. If you don't offer value beyond to them, beyond kind of the purpose-driven sort of your brand, they're probably not going to buy unless there are price or convenience advantages. Then at the very kind of end, the laggard side of that bell curve, you've got people who are completely unaware of the cause and kind of the purpose and mission in the first place. They just don't know that it's a thing, right? For any brand, whether you're kind of looking at this through the technology adoption curve or kind of like the values-based model that I just described, the real challenge is adopting customers that are not the early devotees and getting into that larger mainstream part of the bell curve, the mainstream market. And that gap between those two segments is the chasm. So the question really is how do you cross the chasm? And for you, your earliest customers, they're going to love that your products are made from recovered plastics that were just waste in the ocean. But to cross the chasm, you need to translate that purpose into broader benefits, whether they be product or brand based. The average shopper, they might not be motivated by your mission alone, but if the gear is more durable because of the plastics you're using, or more comfortable or better priced, or there are some features for activities that they're doing that are really beneficial, you've got their attention, right? It's just like building kind of a regular product. Purpose alone isn't going to carry you. And this kind of brings me to a critical point. Purpose is powerful, but purpose alone won't carry your brand beyond the niche, unless you find the formula like kind of Patagonia did. They did a great job of scaling their brand kind of built around purpose. Their environmental activism, it's kind of legendary. But the thing is, even with that activism, if their jackets fall apart after, one season, nobody would care about their values. The product, it kind of also has to stand on its own on top of this values-driven, purpose-based sort of mission. Another example to think about is Apple. They kind of rarely, if ever, discount their products, and they kind of stake out their mark in the sand around personal privacy. That's an issue that they talk about a lot, and they design features that protect people's privacy into their products. And they never sell on deals. Find an Apple product on sale, and I'll find you a counterfeit product, really. Apple sells on product experience, product quality, and design. The same is true for a lot of luxury brands in kind of the fashion sector. Purpose might add depth to these, but the product strength is what really builds loyalty in the broader part of the market and beyond, the big section of the bell curve, and then the smaller section on the late adopter part of it. So I think for you, one real question to kind of ponder is, how do you turn your sustainability philosophy into tangible, kind of practical advantages for your customers? And this is kind of all, what I'm throwing out here is kind of all product-based stuff. Ask yourself, does the use of recycled ocean plastics make a part of your gear stronger in some way, more durable? Does it reduce weight? Or can those plastics in a certain formulation be used to improve the comfort of the product? Is your process maybe more cost effective in the long run? Like there are some plastics that are less expensive when they come from recycled feedstock than virgin feedstock. Another thing to kind of ask yourself is like, can you use this recycled plastic advantage to hit price points that competitors can't? Is there like a unique product intersection where you can come in at a better price point than competitors? And that's obviously going to be very, very difficult given the added costs, the premium that this kind of approach to using plastic feedstock, recycled plastic feedstock, kind of harvested from the ocean, is going to contribute to. But if you can find a way to get something at a better price point, that'll be a significant advantage that the purpose-based thing will just enhance over time. The answers to these questions and kind of related questions, they'll help you build a bridge between your purpose and mainstream adoption. So these are the things that will help you cross that chasm as you begin to approach it. Let's talk about the power of proof. It's really another ingredient in authenticity. So consumers have been burned too many times by vague promises. Like we've all kind of run into a situation where something really weird and vague sounded good, but just wasn't. And this is really why third-party certifications matter, why they exist. They act as a shorthand and a kind of building block for credibility when you're making big claims. So depending on your inputs and processes, I mean, you could look into certifications like ISO 14001 for environmental management. That's the Green Seal certification. You could look at an FSC certification for Forest Stewardship Council, if that's kind of relevant, and if there's kind of also paper-based stuff that's a manufacturing input for your products, that might be one to look at. You could look at recycled content standards like CAN/BNQ, that's offered out of a Quebec certification body, and B Corp, which is more of a systemic big picture company level certification. And the value of doing B Corp is that it forces you to build systems and processes that align towards stated values. And it really forces you to be transparent across your whole operation. So you kind of build alignment towards your purpose with a B Corp certification just by the nature of passing that certification in the first place and the recertification that happens over kind of the license of the B Corp certification period. You have to renew it, right? All these certifications, they're going to require time and effort. You can't get around that. But that effort builds both internal systems for accountability that help you scale and helps build external factors for trust. They're basically telling your customers, hey, we're staking our peg out here. This is our claim. We're aligned to this purpose, and we've got the receipts. You brought up discounting as well. So let's kind of talk about the discount dilemma for a bit. I understand the temptation to discount. Like when you're starting out, running a sale feels like an easy way to drive traffic and move inventory. And it gives you a bit of a dopamine hit to see those numbers like 5x or 10x over what they normally are. But the thing that you need to be very careful about is that discounts train customers. They condition people to wait for deals instead of buying at full price. So if you have a pattern of discounting where people know that they can just wait a month or 6 weeks before buying, and you'll run a sale of some sort, what you're really doing is training them to wait for that sale instead of really convincing them about the value of your brand and products at full price. That lesson, I kind of first ran into it a long time ago, like 20 years ago, when I was working as a swing manager at McDonald's during university studies. The regional manager for the franchise group had a mantra: deal loyalty isn't real loyalty. So customers loyal to discounts, they're going to vanish the moment the deal disappears. And that's a tough way to build a brand, especially a brand based around durable goods instead of consumables. So instead of leaning on discounts, think strategically. If you need to move inventory, do it in a way that preserves brand equity. because you are going to go through periods where you just have like an overstock of inventory, something, and you've got to deal with that. You got to convert that inventory to cash. So for example, create private sales for members in your loyalty program. You can create, like VIP tiers based on customer lifetime value. If a customer has spent over a certain amount, they get access to these private sales, private events, kind of tie them into social good that aligns with your brand. You can make events out of it, stuff like that. You can do to move like overstock inventory in a way that still preserves brand equity, doesn't like hurt you by training customers. You can offer exclusive experiences. For instance, you're in Van, go to North Van one day, go to Capilano, invite all of your kind of best customers to go for a hike with you and test out gear. And, when the testing of the gear is done or whatever, at the very end of the hike, say, hey, we've got these 10 backpacks, or we've got these 10 bags, or these 10 like gearboxes or whatever, 50% off. Stuff like that you can do as both a marketing event and a sales event in a way that's very kind of like contained. Handled well, discounting really becomes a tool, not a crutch. So I encourage you to think creatively about discounting, because you are going to have to discount. The challenge is to do it in a way where it doesn't train the massive prospective customers to wait for a deal. Let's talk about transparency. So I think the final piece of this puzzle is transparency, really. One of the biggest reasons people call greenwashing is because they can't really see what's happening. Brands make claims, but the details are hidden. Transparency changes that. You could publish an annual impact report. You could share some behind-the-scenes looks at your supply chain. You could, probably not at the very start, but at some point, you could impose transparency requirements on partners in your supply chain if you have leverage, negotiating leverage. And you could even talk about trade-offs, right? Like customers, they don't really expect perfection, but honesty is something that kind of goes part and parcel with having a purpose-based brand. So if you have to make a suboptimal decision, and you know that that it's going to be a topic of discussion, instead of just kind of shirking away from it and waiting until there's a bit of an uproar, address it head on and say, hey, we made this decision. It sucked, but here's why. And we think it was the best decision that we could make given the circumstances. There's nothing wrong with using that approach in building your brand with those like very, very cause, purpose-driven customers early on. Sunlight's the best disinfectant, right? The more open you are, the harder it is for critics to accuse you of hiding things. When I kind of think about this, there's two rules that I consider kind of unbreakable when it comes to building consumer trust, customer trust, especially early on. Number one, when you make a claim, back it up with evidence, like show the receipts. And number two, when you make a promise to customers, keep it. It sounds simple. It's not in practice. You have to make some difficult decisions and put effort into it to keep those promises. And that's why they're surprisingly rare when it comes to brand building, and why larger companies tend to just abandon those two things. And brands, when they get established, they break those two kind of rules all the time. And the fallout when it comes, it's always the same. Customers walk, they get mad. It's not like the businesses go under or anything, but reputational damage and brand damage does have a significant impact on the operations of businesses. So if you stick to those two rules, I think that they'll really help you to not only avoid greenwashing, but you'll build a foundation of trust that compounds over years. And that trust turns into loyalty, which is the most valuable asset that any company can have. And it's kind of a shame that the accountants haven't figured out how to quantify the value of loyalty and put it on the balance sheet. Because if there was a method for doing that, I think that a lot of corporations would be far more honest and far more positive in the way that they behave. So wrapping up, how do you tell your story authentically? Lead with purpose, but don't rely on purpose alone. That'd be my first point of advice. Translate sustainability into tangible product benefits. What about your sustainability philosophy and set of values makes your product better? Pursue certifications when it makes sense. These are going to add credibility. That's my third kind of point of advice for you. Avoid discounting as a strategy, which you've said, you don't want to discount as a strategy. Absolutely fair, and I think the right move. Use discounting as a tool in a way that is contained and doesn't harm the equity you're building in your brand. Fifth point of advice, build systems that support transparency. And this is where ISO 14001 and the B Corp certification, they really shine. Now, that's not going to be realistic for you in your early days, but keep it on your radar. Last point of advice, and I think this is like above all else, back up your claims and keep your promises. Do these things, and you won't just build a sustainable brand, you will build a sustainable brand that's also resilient. A brand that your customers believe in and return to, not because of a discount or a trend, but because of trust and superiority. That trust, that loyalty, is what will carry you across the chasm and into the mainstream when you get there. All right, Daniel, thanks again for asking such a thoughtful question. Kind of a big one to take on like a Friday in August on a holiday weekend, but I really enjoyed thinking through it. If you're listening, folks at home, if you're listening and thinking, hey, I got a question of my own, send it my way. I'd love to feature it in a future AMA. There's a link for that in the show notes. That's it for this podcast edition. Check out all the stuff in the show notes, of course, and we will see you next time.
And that's it for this episode of The Journey Podcast Edition. If you're building something from scratch or scaling something messy, make sure to follow, share, or just send this to someone else in the trenches. Until next time, keep climbing.